It's wonderful to have everybody here. Um, and welcome to our program, Interviewing at Your Best. My name is Colleen Murphy, and I am a Senior Associate Director of the Graduate Career Development Office. I'm joined here with Laura Aiken, who is the Director of Graduate Career Development and Alumni Career Development. Today, we have professionals representing travelers, and they are going to be sharing some great information about interviewing. And that's a topic we all could use some help on. So I'm going to begin by introducing Taliesin Berrio, and he is with the Product Management Department of Travelers. And then we're also joined by the Recruiting Department, and representing the Recruiting Department of Travelers is Christine Chamberlain and Nathan Waltering. So I'm going to turn it over to Christine, and thank you again for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. Thanks for having us. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine. As Colleen mentioned, I am with University Relations over at Travelers. We are the department responsible for recruiting our intern and full-time candidates for our leadership development programs, which our opportunities are open right now as we speak in our career site. So thanks so much for coming. We do have a small group, so this is going to be a really casual presentation. We just have a wide variety of tips to give you. We're going to get pretty candid with you, kind of give you the behind the scenes of everything. You're going to get to hear from Tal and Nathan, our two panelists today, as they weigh in from both sides, the candidate experience and experience being a recruiter with us. So let me just go to the next slide here, which is right here. So this is just a little bit of an agenda of what we're going to be going through. I'll start off by telling you a little bit about Travelers in case you're not already familiar with us or could use a refresh on what we do. We'll welcome our panelists again and let them kind of start talking and introducing themselves. And then we'll get right into the tips. We kind of have it split out, different prep suggestions for before the interview, tips and suggestions for success during the interview. And then even after the interview, there are some action items and different FYIs that we wanted to make you aware of. At the end of the presentation, we will tell you a little bit more about our openings and some different takeaways that you should have following this. And then we'll open it up to you because, of course, we want to engage with you and make sure that we're covering everything that you would want to know about interviews or travelers or anything else for that nature. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to pop them into the chat. We will address all the questions at the end where you can either speak them live or we'll go through the chat. It's whatever works best. And of course, this presentation is being recorded, as you probably got the notification. So we will be sending a follow-up, including this deck, a copy of the recording, and then some other miscellaneous materials that I would like to share with you all in the coming days following this presentation. So that's just something else I wanted to make you aware of. Okay, so let's get started with just a quick overview of Travelers. Travelers is a property and casualty insurance company. So we provide products on both the personal insurance side and the business insurance side in areas such as auto, property, and then different business products. So for personal insurance, which you'll see in the second bullet point is one of our business lines, you can think of that as any type of insurance that you or anyone in your family may purchase. That's your car insurance, your home insurance. If you are in an apartment, your renter's insurance. We also offer wedding insurance, which is kind of a unique product that I only learned about a year or so ago that we offer. We also have business insurance, which is everything a company may need in order to be insured as far as company cars, company property, workers' compensation, and different things like that. And then we also have our bond and specialty line of business as well. And we have approximately 30,000 total employees. Our main campuses are located in Hartford, Connecticut, which is probably the one that's going to be the most relevant to this audience. And then we also have a second campus available in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we have smaller offices in pretty much every US state, along with an international presence in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Ireland. And we have a picture here on the slide. This is actually our Hartford campus. So if you are standing with our tower on your right, this is what you see. So you see our iconic umbrella logo is on the plaza, and you can see some of the buildings around it. And then lastly, you can see some of the awards that we've won. These aren't every award that we've won. This is just kind of a sampling, but we've received the award from Glassdoor for our top CEOs for 2021. Way Up, which is a job platform designed for early career and intern candidates. We have won the award for top 100 internship programs in 2020, which is what's on the slide. We have won 2021 as well, although I'm not sure if that one has made its way to our career site yet. So just because I'm not sure if it's approved to share it out, I have the 2021 here. And then our top 100 entry level employers award from collegegrad.com. So that's just a little overview of Travelers. It's very high level, but we have a lot more information out on our website, and we'll actually be delving into that a little bit later on into the presentation. Okay, so I am really pleased to present our two panelists who Colleen kind of overviewed at the start of the presentation. We've got Nathan Woltering, who is a senior consultant in university relations. So he is actually my coworker, and he's kind enough to be on the presentation today. He is also responsible for recruiting and recruitment strategy for our finance leadership development program. So he's got all the information about that, what we look for, and things of that nature. And then we have Taliesin, he goes by Tal Barrio, who is a market director within our product management department. And he is a graduate of our product management leadership development program. So he actually went through the program, he graduated, he was placed most likely in a market analyst capacity. He probably went to senior market analyst, and now he's a market director. So he is an example of someone who has received insane career growth from going through this awesome program. So he's kind of here to talk and give a nod a little bit to that. So I do want to turn it over, Nathan, if we want to start with you, just so the students can hear an introduction and a little bit about your background from you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So again, my name is Nathan. I have been with Travelers for about 10 years now. I started the university relations the beginning of last year, so a pretty wild time to start a new role and to start, in the hiring space. But I was recruiting for I think 4 years prior to that, and I've recruited talent across the board from entry-level interns and trainees all the way up to, I think my highest level role was a director level position at one point. And prior to that, I actually worked in the call center here. And I'm one of those few in the St. Paul campus you heard Christine mention. So I'm over in St. Paul myself. And I started in a call center. And I actually started, I got my degree, a useless degree in theater, which was super helpful for me. But, with the right networking and the right interviewing, you can get kind of the roles that you're sort of looking for and just being open to new opportunities. So really excited to be where I am now. I get to circle back and use that theater background to present stuff like this to you all. So I'm very excited about it.
See, there's that transferable skill, Nathan. Thanks so much for
I've been
introducing
spending
yourself.
10 years trying to convince people that it is, so it better be.
Well, thank you. And Tal, if we want to turn it over to you just to give a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure, thanks for having me. Yep, my name's Taliesin Barrio. So I was actually a Bentley grad, so I'm part of the class of 2015. I majored in economics and finance at Bentley, and actually joined Travelers upon graduating in 2015. So kind of similar to what Christine had said, when I graduated, joined PMDP, kind of did my year in the program. So the PMDP program is vetted largely in our personal insurance product management department. So kind of did a year in that group, kind of the PI side, and then have since moved over to our small commercial product management team. So focusing on kind of smaller, small business type coverages. So workers' comp, CMP, which would be kind of your property and liability together for small businesses. So I've been on kind of the small commercial product management side for the last 4 or 5 years, kind of since coming out of the program. So yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for giving just brief introduction, and we'll be hearing more from Nathan and Tal kind of throughout the presentation. All right, here is the engagement portion of our presentation. I love emojis, so there's the explanation behind the screen. We want to hear from you. What are your interview what ifs? And these are not designed to scare you. These are designed to kind of act as a segue to what we're going to be going over in the presentation. But I will tell you that I have personally been afraid of all of these things as a candidate interviewing. I've been with Travelers since 2017, so a couple of years. And that initial interview with Travelers, I did worry about all of this. Obviously, it worked out. I'm here and I've moved to 2 different positions since first starting at Travelers, each one involving an interview. So this is the engagement piece. So I'm going to try to describe this. And Colleen and Laura, if I'm getting it wrong, please jump in. But I want to get you over to the annotate feature. If you move your cursor up towards the top of the screen, it might say something like the screen is being shared. You may see an option, it says more options kind of next to that. If you click on that, there is an annotate button where you can do a stamp, you can scribble all over the slide, you can do whatever you want. I'm just looking for you to use that feature. I don't care if you use a stamp, I don't care if you put this is me, like write it down, I don't care. If you want to just mark off any of these things on the slide that you have been afraid of or nervous of, whether currently or in the past, and if none of them make you nervous, you don't have to annotate that. Did I get the explanation of the annotation feature correct, Laura and Colleen?
Yes, it is view options on the top. It will be right next to that green portion that says you are viewing Christine's screen.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm just going to go ahead and mark all of these because I have been nervous about all of them before. And we will definitely be sure to talk of all of them. So I'll give everyone a couple of seconds here to just annotate. And if anyone is confused and not sure how to find annotate, please put it in the chat or mention it live and we can help you.
I like the little different uses here, little check marks.
Yeah,
I like
there's
the
a lot.
stamp.
I like the stamp too. I also love to draw on these slides. Could make this the whole presentation.
It's a virtual art installation. Make your mark.
All right, so let me just look at what I'm seeing here. So I'm seeing get lost on the way to the on-site interview is a worry. Folks who feel like they may just sound nervous, maybe they can't think of any questions to ask when prompted. A little bit of not knowing what to wear and having trouble connecting to the video platform. So I am seeing a lot of getting lost on the way to the on-site interview. And I will tell you right now that that is something I worried a lot about. So I will be giving you a suggestion later on. I'll tell you a little bit in terms of Travelers in Hartford, what it's like going there and certain things that you can prepare for. And I will also preface it by saying we are currently only doing virtual interviews right now because of COVID. But once the restrictions ease up, we would intend to go back to in-person. So it is very valuable information. All right, so I've seen the annotation stop, so I'm going to go ahead and clear it. Otherwise, we'll see these markings throughout the rest of the PowerPoint. So let's see. Okay. And thank you for weighing in. We're going to go on to the next slide now. Okay. All right, so I am going to be referring to an example position throughout the rest of this presentation. I just think it would be interesting to you to be able to take a different role at Travelers. And therefore, if you're looking to interview for our finance program, our product management, or any of our other programs, you can kind of apply what you've learned from this example and the tips we're going to give to help you there. So the position we're going to be using is a service desk consultant role. And this role is open right as we speak here at Travelers, and I called it up on the career site. I will just explain to you a little bit about what this role is, and then we will refer to the website and this position's description throughout the rest of the presentation. So first of all, introductory information. This is in a customer service capacity. It is in our Hartford office. And essentially, this position is part of our technology support services department at Travelers. So if you're an employee with us and you're having an issue with your computer, it could be anything. If you are receiving error messages within Outlook, which is our email program, if you need help because your computer has blue screened, which is something that happened to me at the beginning of this year, the Technology Support Center is who you call. So this role, the Service Desk Consultant, consultant will answer the phone. They're talking only to internal employees. They are trying to troubleshoot the problem with you. They go through kind of more basic troubleshooting. So the classic, they don't say, is the laptop on? That's kind of like a cliche from calling other technical support centers, but they just kind of talk you through some basic ways to solve the issue. And if it doesn't work out, they will refer you to our desktop support group, which is someone who will literally get on the phone with you and kind of talk you through more of the technicalities. So this service desk consultant role does basic troubleshooting. And you can see in our job description, it's all of the typical stuff you'd expect. We've got a company summary. We are looking to hire one person. We've got our job description summary. We have a note here about our hybrid work location model that's in place for this role, which we do 3 days in the office, 2 days at home for most of our roles. And then a listing of our primary job responsibilities, which is essentially what I just explained. Then our minimum qualifications, education, work experience, knowledge, and then the competencies. And last but not least, at the bottom of this, you'll see our employment practices statement, and then an email address to connect you over to our accommodations process, if that's something that any of our candidates would require. So that's a little tour of this description. So now I'm actually going to pop it back in to our presentation. And we are going to start with before the interview. So you've applied to the service desk consultant role, and congratulations, you've been scheduled for an interview. So here are a couple of things we're going to go over now that you can do before the interview begins to prepare. And first of all, we're going to start it off with a question. I would love to direct this one to Nathan. What do you think is the most important thing a student can do to prepare for any interview?
Great, thank you. It's a great question. There are lots of things that you should do. If I had to narrow it down to sort of one or two really, really important ones, I would say it's kind of twofold, right? So practice is really the number one thing that I would say, and that can mean a lot of things. For me, what that means is 2 steps. One, actually read through the job description, and Christine just showed you one of ours, right? So look at that. Know what you're applying for, think about what skill sets might be relevant. And then for me, when it comes time to practice, I have a good friend that I work with, and we've been doing this for each other for years. Every time we go to interview, we call out the other one, we go out to, to a restaurant, whatever, sit down, and I give him the job description and I say, start firing at me, right? What questions do you think that I'm going to get asked? And really just get comfortable with that concept of being asked questions, what you're going to talk about, how you're going to guide that conversation around. And if you give it to someone else, they're going to give you questions that you probably didn't consider as well. So it's really going to give you a lot of great practice in how to sort of think on your feet and be prepared to go out of the way. I can't stress enough that that live practice with someone is so important, is going to improve your interviewing so much. And I know it feels awkward. I know it feels weird, especially if it's a friend, right, or a family member or something like that. But it really does help. And I think once you get settled into it, you can take your time and really get a good feel for it. So for me, that's the number one thing that I do when I'm preparing for an interview. But again, you have to do that front end work as well, right? In terms of looking at the job, knowing what it is, thinking about that kind of thing too. So that's, I guess, if I had to narrow it down, those are the things that I would say.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. And I totally agree. We're going to go into a little more about that in the next slide. So I think it's a really good point. And before we move on, Tal, I just wanted to get your opinion. Is there anything you think is important for students to do to prepare?
Sure. I think kind of the only thing I'd add to that, to what Nathan said, is understanding kind of what your interest is in the role. So as you're thinking of questions you might have for that role, why, I would say definitely know what it is that makes you interested in that role. So is it, prior experience that you've had in a similar type of role that makes you interested, or maybe it's you don't have experience in that type of role and you really want to learn more about something new, but definitely having kind of that in the back of your head to go to an interview of why am I applying for this role, and kind of what is my yeah, interest in making sure that that comes through in the interview somehow.
Yep, I definitely agree with you. Let me go on to the next slide because you'll find that a lot of the things that Nathan and Tao were saying are things that are actual tips that I was going to recommend as well. So I think that's a wonderful connection. To prep for the big day, for your service desk consultant position interview, first step, conduct research on the employer, the hiring manager, and the job opportunity. This is extremely important. We have spoken to a lot of candidates between the three of us who have not taken these steps. It is very blatantly noticeable. So definitely would have you start by conducting research. Your goal is to understand not only what the job does, but what the company does as well. And it also helps to familiarize yourself with the company culture, benefits, et cetera, because, you know, interviewing is a two-way street. You're on there because you want to get the job, but you also want to make sure that the job and the company are going to be a fit for you, your values, your lifestyle. So this is as much a chance for you to see if this is where you want to be as it is for the employers to see if they want to hire you. So that's even a good tip to think of if you're nervous. Like think of it like you're also the person this company is trying to impress in the interview. So don't go into it thinking, you know, oh my gosh, I have to impress all of these people. This is a lot of pressure. I'm so nervous, because although you do want to put your best foot forward, the company also has a responsibility to put their best foot forward to you. And for that reason, first true confession of this presentation is I have actually been nervous to interview candidates before. I get nervous just like I'm the one being interviewed, because it's my responsibility to make sure that, you know, I don't say anything stupid, that I represent the company in the best possible light, that I make folks interested in working here. And I'm not nervous because, you know, Travelers is not an interesting place to work or the job is not interesting. It's just because as I first started started being from the interviewer side of things, it was just nerve wracking because it's not something I've really done before. But as I got used to it and as I did more of them, it became more comfortable. And you really could put the same advice forth to a candidate. The more you interview, the more comfortable you're going to be. You don't want to say anything stupid. You might be worried about that. You want to represent yourself in the most positive light. So it's really the same thing. We're all nervous. So that is another huge side tip that I'll give you. But in terms of preparing for the big day, you can do things to familiarize yourself with the things that matter to you in the job and the company by rereading the job description, which I just showed you a sample of. You can look around the company's website and social media pages. I will give you the social media pages for Travelers at the end of this. And in a moment, I'll actually show you a couple things on the website that I would suggest you read about. You could even see if your interviewers are on LinkedIn and read through their experience. Of course, just keep in mind that the interviewer may be able to see that you viewed their profile unless you're on private mode, but you can look through their profile. You can look at how they grew through the company, especially if you're going for product management, for example, and Tal is your interviewer. He went through the program already and he has been growing in his career since. So he is a good person too, if you even wanted to look and see what his experience has been like. You can read reviews of the company and the job. So Indeed, Glassdoor, even Handshake. We do have some reviews on there from students. And you can talk to contacts who may be familiar with the company or the job. So let me actually go back to the job description here, our service desk consultant role. So for you to prepare for this interview, there are a couple of things you can do. So this is our careers website. And if you've already been on our careers website, this is going to be a little bit of review. But for those of you who haven't been to this page before, a little quick tour of how to navigate. You can look at Life at Travelers. So we do have an About Us page. We do have a page on Why Travelers, some of our benefits down here as well. Our community involvement, so you can learn about our volunteer opportunities, our diversity opportunities, sustainability, look at some career events we have coming up. So one page that's really cool is this sustainability page. This is something recently that we rolled out on our site. And you could actually take a look at different pillars of sustainability at Travelers. So if you're looking at this and you think, you know, oh my goodness, diversity and inclusion, I'm so passionate about that. You can click on this and read a little bit more about diversity and inclusion. And you can see It says our whole approach to diversity inclusion, all of the training that we do, our talent development and pipeline, our DNs, which are diversity networks. Employees are able to join those. Supplier diversity. You can go down a rabbit hole because, as you can see, there are some links throughout here that you can click on to read more. And it's such a huge, insane amount of detail. And I'm not trying to say when you read about the company that you need to visit every single page on our website. That's going to take you forever. And you're a superhuman if you can memorize a lot of this stuff. So I would say if you just have an idea of what our company does, what our business is, we're an insurance company. That's already a good start. We've had a lot of people think that we're a travel agency because we're called Travelers, or they think we are a health insurance company such as, Aetna, for example, but we are not. We're just property and casualty. So being able to recognize we're property and casualty, being able to have an idea of our lines of business, and being able also to say something that you like about the company, such as if you do look at our diversity inclusion page here on our sustainability website and a fun fact or something you didn't know jumps out at you, mention that because it says something about your personality and about the things that matter to you. And it never hurts, but do not feel like you have to go into a whole biography on Travelers. You definitely don't, just as long as you have an understanding of what we do. All right. Step 2, after you do your research on the company, you're going to want to be prepared to answer interview questions. So this kind of speaks to the worry that, what if you don't know how to answer some of the questions you're asked? And the nature of interviews is that you're not going to know the questions in advance. You're going to know them in the moment. But there is a way for you to kind of predict what the questions are going to be. So what you want to do is when you're reviewing these interview questions, you can look at the job description. There are a lot of hints on there. Your goal is simply to have examples in mind of how you would approach the questions. Do not memorize word for word how you're going to answer the questions. You will go insane and you're never going to deliver it the same exact way, as you memorized it. So I would encourage preparing examples, things such as when you demonstrated each of the soft skills or competencies on the job description, when you completed projects or had responsibilities that mimic those in the job description, or when you exhibited any of the hard skills or technical aspects in the job description. Making a list of all your accomplishments is really useful. So if you think about what you've done in your role so far, if you are a cashier at a grocery store, for example, you can write down, I've provided excellent customer service. Oh, I remember I had this customer who one time couldn't find a certain package of German cookies, and we had to go through all these aisles and find the cookies for them. This is an actual example someone gave me on a phone screen once. I remember when I had a difficult customer and I was able to turn their mood from really upset to all of a sudden they're really happy and telling their friends about our store. I remember working with Microsoft Word at the grocery store because they gave me an opportunity to make like a promotional flyer. These are things that you want to write down and keep in mind because a lot of times the behavioral questions you get, you can actually plug and play these examples. You just have to make sure they're relevant. So that could be a really good tip. And there's also role playing, of course, which Nathan talked about. So with someone else, or if you don't have that friend who's willing or available to sit down with you, you can always record responses on your phone. So this goal is to make sure you're comfortable talking, you're comfortable giving examples, not memorizing how you did it, but just making sure you can naturally make it conversational. And then also Glassdoor has a lot of different reviews from folks who've interviewed with us where they've given samples of questions they've been asked. So that's also another huge tip. So if I quickly go back over to our job description for the service desk consultant, to demonstrate how I would go through, and I've done this personally as a candidate, and it has really helped. I have actually had some of the questions I thought of asked of me, so it was really useful. If you go through this, the first thing that I would do is go down to this job-specific technical skills and competencies. So it says, for example, problem solving and decision making, team orientation, there's leadership skills. I look at this and I say to myself, okay, I better be able to describe a time when I solved a problem effectively. Oh, they want me to be able to work as a team. I had better be able to describe a time when I had to work as a team or when I had to gain support from team members to help me in doing something. And leadership, you can see communicates with internal and external customers. I'd better be able to come up with an example of when I effectively communicated with a customer. So that's the type of thing that I used to do. I used to come up with questions just based on that. And then if you see here, customer service experience is preferred. You know that if you have customer experience on your resume, you're probably going to be asked to elaborate on it. And then if you look at like the primary job duties and responsibilities, so answering internal and external customer phone calls, that's more about customer service. Using available resources to determine the answers to problems and questions from customers. You might be asked, therefore, tell me about a time when you didn't know the answer to a question and you had to go in search of the solution. How did you do it? So I know that I was able to like throw all that out there really quickly, but if you look at the job description, honestly, that is your best starting point to be able to predict the questions you're asked. Because I know for me, when coming up with screening questions for my internships that I recruit for, I do look at the job description because what's the point in me asking questions that aren't going to matter within the job? I'm going to want to ask questions about the things that are required. So that is a huge tip that I would suggest for all of you. So that's step 2. All right, I have certainly talked enough within the past couple minutes. So I do want to turn it on over to Nathan. What are 1 to 2 questions that you recall asking candidates during an interview that you've conducted, just to give the students an idea of like a sample question?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely can give you a few. And some of them allude to things that we've touched on already, right? I know right up front, one of the things we ask most folks, and Tel kind of alluded to this as well, is sort of what do you know about this position, and why are you interested, right? And I think that's really, really important, and it tells us a lot about, have you done your research? Quite frankly, do you, I've had people come into this completely wrong with their understanding of the position, right? And be just way off base because let's face it, some of these positions are extraordinarily niche, right? They can be pretty narrow in their focus. And I've had that be okay, right? I've had people that were wrong, but I could tell that they really thought about it and they thought about based on that, here's how my skill set applies. Here's why I think that's something I want to do. And so they're, again, even though they weren't 100% correct, it was very impressive because I could tell that they'd put a lot of thought into it. They'd really looked into it and done everything that they could to understand why they're even here. Beyond that, when we get into the real questions, right, 2 that I always point out would be, 1 is give me an example of when you've had to provide a difficult piece of information to someone or had a difficult conversation. What did you do to prepare for it? What was it about? What was the reaction? All that good stuff. And Christine talked a little bit about behavioral interviewing, which is, for those of you who know about it, this definitely falls in that category. Another one was, tell me what you do to build strong business relationships, right? And when I ask that, I'm going to be digging in on specifically when have you had to hustle, right, to build those relationships? Because sometimes they're really easy. We all work with people that we just click, we get along, it's great. Those are great. What I want to know about is when have you had to make it work, and how did you do it? What did you do? So these are examples of good questions, and you can hear me talk about the follow-ups are going to be really important. In my mind, good interviewing is going to be relatively few questions. If I have half an hour with you, I might ask you 4 things. But each one of those, I want to get into what was it about that? How did you find yourself in that position? How did you work your way out of it? I really want to dig in. So really think about the substance behind your answers and trying to make those connect to real situations and experiences that you've had, because that's going to get to the heart of what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. And I think also to refer back to one of the things you said, the first question for a lot of our interviews tends to be, what do you know about travelers, and why do you want travelers, and why do you want this role? I have had this happen before. And I would say one of the worst things that you can do to respond to the question, what do you know about travelers, is Honestly, I don't really know a whole lot. Could you tell me about Travelers? Because to me, while I will go on and tell you about Travelers, I am thinking this is cutting into the rest of the interview. You could have done your research in advance. I am making an assumption here, but I am assuming that most, if not all of you, have a phone or some sort of internet access or access to a computer. It really takes 5 minutes just to learn about Travelers. Like I said before, you don't have to be able to spurt out all this trivia about our company or anything. Just go in knowing who you're applying to. And it's good for you as well because, you want to know what the company does. You want to find a way it connects to you. Otherwise, why should you be interested in working at a company that you have no idea what it does? So that is a really good tip from Nathan, along with the other things that he mentioned as well about some of the questions.
Yeah, I think that's funny, Christine, because I personally, I resent the question that's like, why do you want to work here? Right?
Oh, really?
You don't work here. How should you know why you want to work here? Right?
That's a
And
good point.
if in my mind, like I don't care for that question particularly. And I get that we're looking to, it's another one to kind of get on, have you done your research and do you know what we're all about? Right. So it's kind of another
Right.
way of asking that. But I always like to reassure people, don't worry. I don't expect that this has like always been your dream job since you were 4 years old. Right. It's our job as an employer to get you passionate about wanting to continue to do the work that you do. Right. I don't need that necessarily to come 100% externally, that you have to manufacture that. But so when you get that, just know that we're not necessarily looking for you to like convince me that this is what you're born to do. We're looking to find out, like, does this person know some good things about us that kind of drove them to apply?
Yeah, exactly. And Nathan's mention there also brings up a really good point that interviews are very subjective. It really depends on who the interviewer is. There are some interviewers at Travelers I know of who really put a lot of stock into that question. And then interviewers like Nathan, who, he's just curious of your story, but it's not the end all be all. So I would say just in your preparation, keep that in mind. And of course, something I should have said earlier is we obviously cannot speak to what every other interviewer at Travelers is going to want. We can't speak to what other companies are going to want. So we're trying to shape this presentation to help you with interviews in general, not necessarily just at Travelers, but please keep in mind that we just don't have the intel of what other companies do. So thanks, Nathan, for bringing that up. That's a really good point.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to torpedo everybody's.
No,
I do things
no.
so differently from everyone. No, that's great.
No, feel free to throw anything in if you ever think of anything else. All right, Tal, it's your turn to answer a question here. So really curious, and I know when we were speaking last week, you gave a really good perspective on this, but for any students interviewing with Travelers, what is something specific you would suggest students come prepared knowing about us?
Sure, yeah, I think what always impresses me is when someone asks a question about either a recent event or announcement that either may have been in the news, could have just been something that they found on the Travelers page. But I think if they find it right, something that's more relevant or something they might have come across separately, I think that's always impressive. So let's say one example that comes to mind is I had an interviewer or an interviewee once asked about a recent agreement we entered with Amazon that was probably something that came out a week or two in the past. So certainly impressed that someone was kind of on top of their research to kind of pick up on something like that. Anything else around like industry dynamics, right? How maybe where we think changes might be going in the industry. So is there any kind of disrupting effects that we're looking for? So I would say anything like that, right? Just having some kind of recent event or a newsworthy item that would be something that you'd be genuinely interested in, and not just kind of asking for the sake of asking and then moving on.
Yep, that's a perfect point. So to kind of add to the preparation tips that we gave you before, helps to just do Google News and look at some of the different hits about Travelers. I know we tend to be in Insurance Journal a lot. You can check all of that out. Also, our social media pages are a good way because I feel like sometimes, I could be wrong, but I feel like sometimes they do, I don't know if they connect to external links. They may just mention it in their own words, but keeping up with the different events going on at the company is great. It shows that you care and you're thinking a lot about just the different things that Travelers is getting involved with. That's a good point. All right. And then step number 3 to prepare for your interview is, of course, prepare thoughtful questions to ask your interviewers. At the end of every interview, you're likely going to be asked if you have any questions. And if you're having a conversational interview and you want to throw questions in before you're even asked at the end, that's totally okay. But you just want to make sure you have kind of a laundry list of good questions to ask about the role, about the company, even about the interviewers and their take on the role. That's totally okay. I have a couple ideas to think about listed. Is there any responsibility or project in the job description you would like more detail on? That's a personal go-to for me because job descriptions can never be all inclusive of everything you're going to be doing in the role. There's always things that come up. So the job descriptions tend to be a little vague sometimes. So if you ever have any question about anything on the job description, definitely feel free to ask it. I mean, the interviewer should have that information, especially if they've been in that space before. Another good one, how will the role you're interviewing for interact with the interviewer? That's a good question. This is one, if you know you're interviewing with the hiring manager, maybe don't ask it there. But if you're interviewing with a colleague, just ask the question. Maybe they'll say, hey, we typically do XYZ project and I'm planning to work with this position holder on it. And it gives you just that good context. A huge point is be sure you're not asking questions that are answered directly in the job description or elsewhere on the website, because again, if you ask questions that are unique, that's a nod to you did your research. And I would also advise for you to really do a laundry list of questions. The more you can prepare, the merrier, because there have been times when, a couple of years ago, I interviewed for a role. I had some questions, but while the interviewer was talking about the role, they actually answered 3 of them. So if I only had those 3 questions, suddenly I don't have any questions because they were answered. So it's good to always ask questions to demonstrate your curiosity about the role, but come up with a laundry list, maybe rank them, maybe put like a star next to the question you really want to be sure is answered. Because if you have a list of like 10 questions, for example, you're probably not going to have time to ask all of them. So you want to make sure you're using the time to ask the ones that you really want to know about and not just some random question that you may ask if you just need to fill it with more questions. So I will quickly show you on our job description, just kind of a demonstration of how to come up with questions that you might want to ask about the service desk consultant position. So if I'm looking here, answers as internal, external customer phone calls, emails, and fax queries, it kind of walks you through how a customer interaction works. But one question coming to mind here is, well, what's a common question that this individual may get from customers? Is there like a common issue that folks have with their computers? Are folks always getting the blue screen of death on their computer? Which I would like to say no. But if there is a common issue that comes up, that if you're in the role, you're going to want to make sure that you're aware of how to answer it because you'll literally get it all the time. That's a really good question to ask. Let's see. Uses available resources and industry best practices. Well, what is this? What is an example of a resource? Because the job description doesn't say that. How can you find the information you need? Is there a database of different articles? Are there memberships with different organizations where maybe you can get involved to learn about how to help with IT support and things like that? Oh, here's a good one. Maybe assigned a special project. Okay, what's an example of a project? What's a project that someone in this role has been involved with in the past? Can you elaborate on that? Insurance knowledge preferred. Can you explain a little bit about what I might learn about insurance or what I should come in knowing? If you do have insurance knowledge, that is perfect. But since it says preferred, I would feel comfortable asking and saying, hey, I actually did some research. I know about these different concepts in insurance. Is there anything else you would suggest this position holder know about insurance to come into the role? And are there any opportunities to learn about it on the spot or within the position? So those are just a couple questions. And as you can see, I looked at this for about 10 seconds before I had a question. It's just probing into some of the things on here and being like, hey, I know you say use available resources, but what do you mean? Like, what are the resources? And if they tell you some examples, like they say, we actually have this best practice website that we consult external to travelers, what you can do is write it down. And after the interview, you can go to that website and look at it and get familiar with it already. So that is how I would approach this section because it's It can be daunting to have to come up with questions, but really, if you look at the job description, you can come up with a bunch right off the bat just because job descriptions in their nature are not super duper detailed. So that is probably my biggest point for that. All right, to piggyback off of this a little bit, Tal, I'm going to start with you. What are one or two good questions that you've heard from candidates in the past that you think are just really awesome questions they've asked?
Sure. I think always a good one is whenever someone asks about kind of my experience or what I like about the role within the company. So I think those are always good ones because that's going to be relevant to them if they're thinking of joining. They're going to want to know what their experience is going to be like, and me being able to answer what it is that I like about the role might help the interviewee just understand the role better and if it's a good fit for them. So I'd say that's always a good one because it to me shows that they're interested. They want to learn more, even if they may have still done their research to know what the role is and why they want or are interested in that role. But this is just kind of another this is potentially their first opportunity to really meet someone within the role and to really learn more about it outside of just kind of going through the website.
Perfect. Yep. And that's not something that I had touched upon. So thanks for bringing it up. Alongside of just asking questions from the job description about the role, nothing wrong with asking the interviewers to talk about themselves a little bit. What do you like about the role? What do you think is most challenging about the position? And you can take note of this stuff and use it to figure out, hey, is this a challenge that you're prepared to overcome in the role? And then you can ask follow-up questions even just based on how the conversation's going. So I think that is an awesome tip to provide. Nathan, want to see your perspective. Do you have any questions that you've been asked by candidates before that you think is worth sharing with the students?
You know what? I'd love to put you on the spot and flip it to be like, here's some questions that I absolutely do not want to be asked. Can I do that? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, whatever you want.
Because I feel like there are like two main things that people do that really, really sour the experience for me. And one is there's a variety of questions that all get to the same point, which is what you want to know, which is what are my odds here, right? People are often asked, how many people are applying for this role? How did I do, at the end of the interview? How did it go? Please don't ask me those, right? You're putting me in a really weird position where I either have to lie to you and tell you like, oh, it was great, or I have to say like, I can't divulge any information right now because we're still in the middle of the interview process with other candidates. So those are just really awkward and sort of sour the experience. The other one is please don't ask things that we've talked about already unless you're adding clarification to it, right? It's way more common than you think that I give someone information about a position, like the hours or something like that, and then later they ask it because you had it written down to ask or because you weren't listening. Either way, it really sends this impression that like, okay, who have I been talking to you? Like, what's going on? I gave you this, you should know this. So, I think you have both done a great job talking about some great questions. I thought it might be nice to have a couple things to sort of avoid.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you for the perspective. And one thing that jogged my memory, there's just so many details with this, and this is why I'm sending the deck out after the presentation. But another tip that I would give is if you're in a second round interview, for example, and you're going to have a one-to-one interview with me, and then you're going to have a one-to-one interview with Nathan right after. Don't ask us both the same questions because sometimes when we debrief, we do talk about the questions candidates ask. It is okay if you ask both of us our favorite part of the position or the most challenging part because it's subjective. We could both have different answers. But if you ask Nathan, can you elaborate upon the types of customer questions you get? And then you ask me that as well. It's going to look a little weird. Like, why did you have to ask both of us? Because you received the answer already. And the answer is going to be the same from both of us as well. So that's just another parting tip for this part. Okay. Dressing for success. Wanted to spend a little time on this. I included the picture because honestly, I really like everybody's facial expressions and gestures in it. But this is just an overview of what to wear for an interview. It does not matter if you're going to an on-site or a virtual interview. You want to make sure you're dressed professionally. It is better to be overdressed than to risk making a bad first impression. So irregardless of what the dress for your day policy is at Travelers, please always dress professionally. It's just too big of a risk to throw on something that you think matches the culture at Travelers, and it actually doesn't. So I would be sure you're wearing like a suit jacket, a nice top, like a dress, something like that, based on the different pictures that you're seeing from these interesting individuals and their gestures they're making. Okay, we are going to throw it over to Nathan. This is a nod to the fact that at Travelers, we are doing a lot of virtual interviewing right now. And honestly, with COVID being so up in the air, we don't really know when we're going to be going back to in-person interviews. Maybe some groups will stay doing virtual interviews to avoid candidates having to do travel or commuting. So with that being said, Nathan, as we kind of transition sections here, what is your top piece of advice in preparing for virtual interviews specifically?
Yeah, I think it would be very similar to preparing for a live interview, which is to just do the prep work ahead of time. It just means different things. So for this, that means whatever the software is, if it's Zoom, if it's whatever it happens to be. And there's a lot of little wonky ones out there. If they send you a link or something like that, test it out, get familiar with it. How's it going to feel? Where's your camera set at? Are you in a space in your your living situation where it's quiet, where you can focus? Can you eliminate as many distractions as possible? All of that is going to be very, very relevant for a virtual interview. So again, this is very much just kind of setting up and doing like a little dry run, like, hey, here we are virtually. You're going to hear a lot about like, hey, look directly at the camera as much as possible and all this other stuff. In my experience, not as, I mean, it's good to know and to practice, but we're awkward at it too, right? This is weird for everybody.
Oh, certainly.
So, just be prepared and know that, you've done your prep work and you can give the interview your all, and avoid some of the big hangups.
Yep, totally agree. Now let's see. Nope. All right. So this is kind of getting more into the logistical side of preparing. So we taught you, or, either taught or reviewed with you how to come up with questions, how to anticipate what you're going to be asked, research the company. But the logistics are really important too. And this is what tended to turn me around. I tend to get lost in details sometimes. I want to make sure, oh my gosh, where do I park when I go to an on-site? What's the software? What if my computer's internet breaks down or something like that? So these are all just as much worries as are the actual interview conversation. So we wanted to cover on that. Nothing is better for your stress and your, being able to calm down and feel more relaxed for the interview than being prepared in advance. So we kind of broke it out: virtual interview tips and on-site interview tips. So I'll start with virtual to begin with. You want to familiarize yourself with the technology in advance, like Nathan said. So at Travelers, we do use Zoom a lot of the time for our interviews, but other companies may use WebEx, they may use Microsoft Teams, they may use some other platform that I've never even heard of that does the same thing as Zoom. So I would be sure that you are familiar with the technology. I would not, please do not wait until it's time for the interview to start setting up the technology. Because what if you go on to do that and you find that you have to install a program or download something, and suddenly it's taking a couple minutes and it's time for your interview and you're kind of scrambling around. So please be sure to do it in advance. You can do it a day before, you can do it an hour before, you could even do it as soon as you receive the information. So if it's a week beforehand, the earlier the better, just to make sure you don't have any unpleasant surprises popping up with technology. And even if you do get the technology installed, what if your webcam isn't working? What if audio is not working? What if? So the best way to kind of ease your mind with this is to prepare as far in advance as you can to use the technology. Also, like Nathan said, ensuring your background is professional, appropriate, and free of interruptions is great. A couple of different tips that I would suggest based on folks I've talked to in the past. I would try not to have your bed in the background when you're doing an interview. I would try to make sure you're not sitting on the bed or lounging on the couch. Things I'm sure you wouldn't do, but just because I've seen people do them before, the idea is out there. Sitting at a desk is always the best. Making sure your background is free of interruptions. So a lot of times I've actually been self-conscious that I don't have any pictures hanging on the wall in here. That is because they're actually all on the floor. This is a newer office, and I've honestly been procrastinating and decorating. So that is why this looks so plain back here. But for an interview, that is actually a great thing because there is no distraction. There is just a blue wall in the background. Whereas if you have a busy background with lots of stuff going on and, hey, your dog is in the background now, that stuff may make the interviewer look over at the background instead of you. So that is just a huge tip. This is something I'm including on here because it has helped me a lot in the past. Have your phone nearby and ready to dial in. I had an issue when we started working remotely where my internet crashed during, probably out of every day during one meeting, my internet would crash and go down. I've since gotten on a better internet plan. I don't know what I would have done for this particular presentation we're doing if I had the previous internet plan. I would be freaking out that you would just lose me on the call. So if you have funky internet like that, or even if you don't, you just never know. Put your phone on the desk, have it nearby, have the dial-in information written on a piece of paper or on another window, because you never know. If a tech issue presents itself, you don't want to leave the interviewers wondering what happened to you or making them feel like they have to figure out how to get a hold of you. Just dial in right to the meeting, explain, hey, I'm so sorry. My internet is honestly the biggest pain in the butt. No one is going to discount you because of something out of your control, like your internet crashing. So just a big tip for you there. And communication is key during tech issues, which I alluded to. You don't want to leave the interviewer wondering what happened. What should they do? You want to be prompt, communicate with them all you can, and let them know. So those are the virtual interview tips. Now for the on-site interview tips, I know a lot of people were worried, what if they get lost and they can't find their way to the interview? At Travelers, if you are interviewing on site in Hartford, it can get confusing. Our talent acquisition department actually used to be a whole block away from the parking garage. We actually moved it so it's a lot closer. So you kind of lose that part of having to navigate the streets of downtown Hartford. But I would suggest, because we do have a parking garage, the parking garage entrance comes out of nowhere. It's a little difficult to find. And I know this because I used to schedule interviews for candidates before I came to university relations. I used to have to actually go outside and find a candidate. I'd have to arrange a meeting spot with them, find a candidate, and walk them to the interview because they got lost. So in order to kind of help you with this, I would hugely, hugely recommend, if you're doing an on-site interview with Travelers, but of course any company as well, this is applicable for, take a trip to the location in advance. So a couple days before, actually get in your car, drive to the location, find the address they gave you, get a heads up on what parking's like. Is it a parking lot? Is it you're going to have to check in at a parking garage, such as you have to do at Travelers in Hartford? How long is this all going to take you? What's the route? Do you know how to get there? Do you know how to navigate your GPS to figure out how to get there, so that way you can arrive? I would also allow at least an extra 30 minutes to avoid being late for the interview. If you're sitting in your car on your phone because you're early and you don't have to go in yet, that is a lot better than arriving a minute before your interview has to start and you still have to walk into the building and check in. It's very stressful. So save yourself the headache, and just plan extra minutes. Bring a pen, paper, extra copies of your resume. It's good to take notes. And what if an interviewer jumps into the room with you? They came from another meeting and they forgot to print your resume. It just looks really good if you can say, oh, I actually have a copy for you. And I wanted to throw this on because of COVID. If you find yourself interviewing during these times with a company, please have a mask with you because some companies do require it. And it's just good to kind of be prepared with that. All right, we're transitioning now. We are at the interview for your service desk consultant role, and we're going to talk a little bit on that. So just a quick overview, you want to be sure you're on time, which we just kind of talked about. You want to be sure you're being yourself. You're presenting yourself professionally, smiling, but if you have a mask on, don't worry because obviously who's going to tell if you're smiling or not if you have a mask on. You want to be open and confident, positive, and courteous and attentive. So quick overview of that. All right. And we have interview improvement opportunities. I would love to ask Nathan for this. What is the number one thing you feel students can improve on during an interview?
Yeah. So I always tell students like the number one thing, and it's hard because it's not like a real technical thing, right? But this element of as you're interviewing and as you're talking, try to be authentic and engaged, right? And be engaged with the interviewer. And for me, with students especially, often you all are great and you do a lot of great prep work, but your prep work really centers around what is the correct answer to each question, right? And I really encourage students to don't think of it as like a true false situation, right? It's not a binary here. I want something that is authentic, that is you've thought about, and then delivered in a way that you are a human being and can continue to improve. And to me, that's way more valuable and relevant than having this is the answer I've prepared and I think it's the right one, so this is what I'm going to provide you. Right, so be in the moment more, and that's so hard because I know we've told all of you like prep, but there is a sense that you also have to go in and be willing to be in the presentation and be yourself.
Perfect. Thanks, Nathan. All right. I apologize if things are popping up one at a time on here.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's like the first one came and then the last one from the other side. I apologize for that. But these are our tips to interview success. And there's a lot on here. Just keep in mind, you're going to get the deck later. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I am going to call out the ones that I think are the most important for preparing. So number one, be specific. This goes for when you're asked, can you tell me about a time when you went above and beyond to help a customer, for example? I've had so many phone screens with folks who have said, well, when we have a difficult customer, what we usually do is this XYZ. That's not really an example, though, of a time you went above and beyond. That's a time when you're saying this is what we do in general. So you want to be sure that you're being specific, that you are just laying out the whole situation, which we'll give you a slide with guidance on in a second. But just being sure that you're really storytelling about your experience and what you did. Don't generalize. We are looking for you to be specific. And there are so many people out there who are not specific. So if you are, that really makes you kind of cut above the crowd. I would also be able to ensure that you're showing enthusiasm and being yourself, like Nathan said. I know it's difficult. I know we did say, here are all the things you can do to prep, but in reality, it's not supposed to be a stilted exchange. It's a conversation. You're having a conversation with somebody about your interest in the job. They're talking to you about, oh, the weather's nice. Oh, it's raining today. Hey, I'm just curious, what interests you in the job? That's kind of how it should go. So just keeping in mind, be conversational, be yourself. There's nothing wrong with showing enthusiasm and passion for the role. Have it show in your tone of voice. You don't need to sound like you're answering a question that maybe the professor asked you in class where, you just give the answer and that's it. You can feel free to make it conversational. It is an interview. So it is for a job, but when you think about what an interview is that you might see on the news or you might see a celebrity doing, it really is a conversation at the end of the day. So that's what I would suggest keeping in mind. And then also using your time wisely. It's your time. Make sure you get the points across that you want. Make sure you're asking questions that you want to know about, and make sure you know why you want this role. Make sure you know what makes you a great candidate for this role, and be prepared to convey it throughout everything you're saying. There's a lot here, though, to go through, and I would suggest that you take a look at it later on when we send it out. But these are just a few of the tips that we have on how to ensure interview success. And just to quickly go over behavioral interviewing, which we've been talking about through these tell me about a time questions. We use behavioral interviewing a lot at Travelers, and I know a lot of other companies use it as well. So it's good to kind of be familiar with what it is if you don't already know. And this slide is really important and a good resource. The STAR method is a really good way to respond to these behavioral questions. It's an acronym. You go through the situation you're describing that you were in. You're going through the task you did, the action, and the results. This is a really good way to frame your responses to those questions asking you for examples. All right, Tal, I wanted to check in with you really quick. Is there anything in particular that you found yourself really liking about candidates you've interviewed in the past for the PMDP?
Sure. I think the first one, just wanted to echo what you had a couple slides back, which was be specific. I think that's a great one. I think when people are specific, and telling kind of their story of, answering some of those behavioral questions, it makes it more memorable. So definitely want to echo that one. I think the other one that I'm big on is just conveying curiosity. So I'd say less important if you've had industry experience or not. I think the important thing is if you seem interested and you're asking questions, not necessarily about what the role is, but just in general, if you seem to be someone who has intellectual curiosity, those are, I think things that always kind of impress me is this person just gravitating towards kind of thoughtful and curious type of questions? Kind of the one that comes to mind.
Okay, perfect. Yep. So it kind of goes back to your passion for the role, your enthusiasm, your curiosity. Nothing wrong at all with letting those kind of leak through. And then after the interview, so you can tell that a lot of the emphasis is on making sure you're prepared to go into the interview. Once you're at the interview itself, you can go ahead and just answer the questions. Your preparation really helps you, but the most important takeaway is to be yourself and try to keep it conversational as much as you can. And after the interview, there are a couple things to keep in mind as well, which we'll go through quickly here. All right, step number one, thank you emails are important. It may sound old fashioned, but there actually are a lot of interviewers I've worked with at Travelers who have taken notice when someone has sent a thank you note and they are very happy about it. On the flip side, they've noticed when people don't do it. So I would say this is another one of those subjective things. Everyone's different about their preference for thank you notes, but it is a kind thing to do. It is a way to indicate your appreciation for that person's time. And it is also a great way to remind them of you and the fact that you're interested in the role. So there's nothing wrong with doing it. And I would always advocate sending one. I would send it 1 to 2 business days following the interview. There have been times when I've had a phone screen with a candidate and 10 minutes later, they sent me a thank you. And while that's definitely nice, it kind of just comes across a little oddly because I mean, we just spoke. It just seems a little more natural to leave a little bit of a pause to allow some time for you to reflect on how it went, for us to reflect on how it went. So 1 to 2 business days following the interview is what I feel is really ideal. And then again, in your thank you, keeping it just at thank you for the interview, that's one thing. But if you include your appreciation, reiterate why you feel you'd be the best fit for the role. And one thing I personally have loved to include in my own thank you notes is I appreciate the consideration either way, because it could end up working out that your interview was great, but someone else just had a teensy bit more experience. So just letting them know that you understand there is the potential for a declination. You're not getting pessimistic, it's just being realistic and saying, I really appreciate it either way is a great idea. Step number 2, this is very, very important. You have to mentally move on from the job. And the reason why I suggest this is to protect yourself, because there are a lot of things that go on in a recruiting process that have nothing to do with you, or it has to do with the amount of time it takes. Someone could be on PTO and we don't get to a decision until a week after we anticipated because we didn't know that person was going to be out. There's just so much stuff you don't know from the outside. So once you complete an interview, act as if you never interviewed at all. Continue applying for other jobs. It's good to have multiple things in the pipeline because if things don't work out, other things do work out. You have more options and you can feel more comfortable in your job search, especially when you're looking for an internship where you have a little bit of a timeline to be able to do that. Keep in mind, recruiting processes can take time. Every company has their own timeline. We'll tell you about our typical timeline in a couple minutes. And please, please do not overthink your interview performance. I am hugely guilty of that. I'll get out of an interview and I'll think back to things I've said and I'll cringe and I'll be like, oh my goodness, I'm sure they think I'm an idiot. It's not true. None of it's true. Please just don't overthink your interview performance. If you have any other interviews coming up, continue to give 100% on them, and just the process will work itself out. And then follow up if needed. If it really has been maybe 2 to 3 weeks since you've heard from the company, there is nothing wrong again with checking in. Thank them again for their time, pleasantly check in. If you do get declined, it's okay to ask for feedback on what you could improve. And please also keep in mind, if you do get declined for a position, it doesn't necessarily mean that your interview is something that needs to be improved. Sometimes it really is, you did a great job, but at the end, we had a candidate pop up who just brought a little bit more experience, and that's who we went with. And there's nothing you can do about that. as far as your interview goes. So that is just something else to keep in mind. And Tal, can you just quickly go through with us for PM? What was your interview experience like?
Sure. Yeah. So after the initial phone interview, I was asked to come back for an in-person interview, and say essentially, right, came in, went to the parking garage. I was greeted by our program director kind of once I got up to the mezzanine floor. So that was, he walked me to where my first interviewer was, and that was just kind of a good way to ease into it, get to learn a little bit more about the program, just in our conversation. From there, had kind of the first interview with someone who was currently in the product management department. And then from there, I had a lunch interview with a candidate who was not a candidate, a participant within the program. So this was someone who kind of had just joined Travelers, right? Also kind of recent grad. So kind of that the lunch interview was a good opportunity to get to know someone who was in my shoes very recently and get a sense of what their experience had been like with the company. So great opportunity there with a lunch interview, and then followed with one last interview afterwards, which again was with someone who was in the department who had gone through the program. So yeah, that was, I'd say, kind of the quick summation of how my interview experience was. It was just a great opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about Travelers, right? I got to kind of see what it was like to work in Hartford, kind of going from the office building to the restaurant that we went to, and you can just kind of see everyone who worked at Travelers at that time, right? Just kind of going to lunch, and yeah, it was a good first impression.
Perfect. Yep. And one thing I would say is to keep in mind that that's the Travelers in-person interview experience. And that is how product management, I think, even to this day, does their interviews. So if you are interested in that program, or you have an interview lined up in person, that is typically how it would go. Virtual, they're setting it up differently. I'm not entirely sure. They're probably not going to be able to take you to lunch, but I would say that the process is a little similar, just virtually. And most of our programs follow a similar format, except meeting with folks who are more applicable to that program as opposed to with product management. But that is a really good outline of your interview experience. Okay, so we're reaching the end of the presentation. I am cognizant of time, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time to engage you in any questions you might have in the last 10 or 15 minutes. So I just want to give you some takeaways. So you attended this presentation, you learned a little bit about interviewing under the realm of the service desk consultant role. What are you supposed to do with this information? I would say to go ahead and apply for opportunities with us. If you have any interest in working with Travelers, look at our career site. We have our internships and development programs open right now. I have listed on the slide all of the various areas, which include finance and product management, which Tal and Nathan are representing today. And we have additional options as well. We also have a lot of other different types of positions, such as our service desk consultant. If you have an interest in kind of helping our internal employees troubleshoot computer issues, for example, you're more than welcome to apply to that role or any other roles that might interest you. I also listed some information, commonly asked questions we get about our internship and full-time programs, such as when do they start? How long is the internship? So I have listed all that on here. And again, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, I will be sending kind of a follow-up email to all of you with summarizing these takeaways and giving more information to you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and this is just a little bit about our hiring timeline. We're asked this a lot as well. So approximately, could be a little bit different for some of our other programs, but roughly this is the timeline we're looking at. So given that mid-October is coming up soon, and this is when second round interviews start, if you want to apply with us for something and you haven't done it yet, please don't waste any time. Please be sure to get in the process so that you don't miss out. And then this is kind of how the rest of our process works. And then last but not least, we have our social media handles. Each of these pictures is a clickable link. So when you get the presentation at the end, and there's a couple other resources. So I do see that we have had a couple of students drop off probably to get to other classes. So I am going to skip past this question and kind of get on to if anyone had anything they wanted to ask us or any of the panelists before we go.
Christine, Colleen had made me aware of a couple questions that students had been asking, and one is about parking, right? When you show up to an on-site interview, is it okay to ask if the employer is going to reimburse for parking or that kind of thing? So I can address that very quickly, and I would say you're absolutely fine to ask, right? I think it's very fair to just say, great, do you know what the parking situation is? Is that something that I can be reimbursed or validated for? And we'll do the best that we can. Do know you may not get it, right? Just because you're asking for it doesn't mean it's going to be something that's happening. But yeah, you're well within your rights to ask. And the same can be said about, the question then was if students are flying elsewhere in the country to interview. Do know that at least at Travelers, that's going to be pretty uncommon. We don't ask people to fly. I mean, it's a huge commitment, not just financially, but in terms of time. So unless you're applying for like an executive vice president role or something like that, we're probably not going to fly you around. So we won't ask you to do that, which means, of course, that we won't ask you to pay for it. If a company does ask you and says you need to be here, you absolutely should ask if they're going to pay for it. I would say if a company is asking you to fly somewhere for an interview and they are not paying for it, that's probably a pretty big red flag for you right up front, right? This company's already looking for you to invest. So I would really be mindful of that as well. But I mean, in today's world with all the virtual interviewing, very rare that company is going to ask you to do that.
Yeah, and I can say just coming from the scheduling team for interviews at Travelers, for parking, we do fully cover it for Hartford and St. Paul, I believe. Nathan, I'm not entirely familiar with the parking over there, but I think we do cover it for that as well in St. Paul. And then for flying and travel arrangements, we also cover the entire thing because that was part of my role back then was I had to coordinate all of that. So please rest assured that we do offer that.
Great. If any of the students have questions, now is your time. You could either put them in the chat box or you are welcome to unmute and just ask a question. So please feel free at this time. Any students who are here today? I know that Christine, everybody really did a beautiful job of covering quite a bit today.
Got a question from Estelle. I know that's a tricky one. Christine, did you deal with any sponsorship stuff a lot when you were, because I can jump in if that's not something that you're super familiar with.
I'm just looking at the question right now.
Yeah, the question is for anybody who's not reading the chat, as an international student, many of our positions, and Estelle to clarify right now, many of them don't offer sponsorship. We have a few that do, sort of depending on the role, but those can be typically pretty high level. Usually those are like data science, for example, does, but then we're looking for master's level students or PhD level students. So there are some that do, but many don't. The question is, can you apply since you'll be getting married to an American next summer? The application process, the way that is phrased is actually, will you be eligible for full-time employment in the United States at the start time? So the answer would be yes, right? Provided that is, you're willing to know that and you're able to back that up and explain that. So definitely, right? I would say in a more broad sense, you can apply to anything you want, right? We're not going to stop you. You're more than welcome to apply to things. Just know that that's going to be a requirement and you may have to be willing to demonstrate that.
No, thank you, Nathan.
Yeah.
Did I miss any other questions? Because I saw things coming through the chat, but I was presenting, so I couldn't
I don't think so. She said, thank you, everyone. Please ask at this time. Just give it a little, maybe a couple seconds here in case anybody does have a question.
Yeah, it could be on anything. Got hirers right here. Any part of that process or whatever you want to talk about.
Yes.
Let's do it.
Okay. Okay, well, I think at this time we'll conclude the program. Before we definitely leave today, though, I just want to thank all of the students especially thanking travelers for being with us today and sharing such great information about interviewing at your best. I know many of you are walking away with excellent, useful information. I also want to encourage all of you to know that there are quite a few mock interviews that you could sign up for at this time on Handshake. You will go into Handshake, you will go into resources, and then on the resources, and then you will click into on-campus interviewing, and you will see, if you hit on the search, put the keyword search in of mock interview, you will see where you can now select and schedule a time for a mock interview with a professional. Also, we have a mock interview with a professor, Professor Wasserman. He is amazing. So there are opportunities to also schedule in a mock interview with him there. And finally, we have a resource called Big Interview. And so if you go into the career development webpage, you'll be able to see listing for resources, and you can click right into Big Interview, and the passcode is 1917. Any questions you may have on this, please feel free to reach out to your career coach, either on the grad side or undergraduate side. So Christine, Nathan, Taliesin, thank you so much for all of this wonderful information today. I know Laura and I, out of the Grad Career Development Office, are so appreciative of your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks everybody.
Appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
All right. Bye, everybody.